within our school improvement programming and our process within our school district. So today is just kind of a high over level of what MyKIP is. The focus of this process is for continuous improvement. And MyKIP is called the Michigan Integrated Continuous Improvement Process. So we like acronyms in education. This is the MyKIP process. If those of you that have been in education before may have heard it as ASSIST, or there may be other programs that were out there just with school improvement before as well. So this is the platform we use. MyKIP has a specific Michigan Department of Education focus of mindset, process, and platform. And what that means is the big idea is mindset is really that continuous improvement, focused on the whole child, making sure that equity is at the forefront of learning. These are words specifically from the Michigan Department of Education. The process is that continuous improvement cycle. In the past, what we would do is we would get a document that we had to fill out with checklists. And at the end of the year, we would fill out the checklist. So it was an assurance that we were doing things. It was an act of compliance. This process is really about action over compliance. It's about having a continuous process, continuous meetings. And I'll show you an example of what that means today. And then there's a platform, which is extremely clumsy still. They're calling it a streamlined web-based application, that integration tool that integrates your resources along that continuous improvement, and it also is supposed to integrate your funding sources as well into that. That's where the clumsy part, is still, and they're still making changes and improvements to it. So it's really been a shift in thinking. Rather than having a compliance-based approach, it is really about continuous improvement, having multiple meetings focused on improvement, looking at progress monitoring of skills, looking at the whole child, and really having a systems thinking approach. So rather than having individual buildings having their own goals that are isolated within those buildings, having a system-wide thinking approach so that you're isolating your funding sources through this process as well. So the mindset...
Keith, I'm sorry. You said so that you're isolating your funding resources as well. What did you mean by that?
So in the past, when you did school improvement, it was just about compliance, and then you had a general fund, and you weren't connecting the two things together. Now you're connecting a system thinking approach, and I'll kind of explain it when we get through the presentation. So you will identify one area of need, and then you will identify where does that funding source come from. Is it general fund? Is it grant funding? So it's kind of, rather than saying, okay, it's all going to come from general fund, this gives you an option to kind of develop a better systemized approach to how you're funding some of the school improvement initiatives.
So we're going to do this thing and pay for it this way.
Correct.
Correct. As opposed to just, let's do something swell and not pay for it.
Yeah.
Right.
So they're going to forward centers.
So the mindset,
That's going to drive.
so the mindset is focused on three specific areas. The equity question we have to ask within any of...
Sorry, just time out, just a short overview of MyKIP, which is the state of Michigan's platform for school improvement planning. And in the past, the retired policies address this, the current ones don't. So that's, sorry.
That's okay. How you doing?
Sorry for my turn.
So there's an equity question that we have to ask. Do all students receive the opportunities, environment, supports based on their need rather than equal distribution? So this is where we make a determination. How do we want to disperse some of our resources? Give an example of that. We've just recently purchased Lexia licenses for our school district. We've been using this at our elementary level. We have shifted it to the middle school and high school level to provide some integrated intervention support, but we are doing it based off of need. So it's really based off the individual student needs. So we know how many students are being able to use those resources.
What
And
is
we're
Lexia?
filtering it. It is a reading intervention digital platform that provides immediate feedback to teachers so they can drive their instructional practices and interventions for students. So, thank you. Then we also have to focus on the whole child. MyKIP wants us not just focusing on academics, but also the whole child, so taking a look at the physical, social, emotional, and behavioral needs of students. That's why we have restorative practice as one of our strategies within our MyKIP goals. And then MyKIP also wants us to focus on individual students. Do we have the data process that allows us to know our individual students well? That's why we have Illuminate, where we enter all of our data. We have individual data for our students that we are able to pull for teachers to kind of access where they're at. Lexia actually has a data process even within that to show which standards a kid needs support in, and then we have Blackline Master Support right from that program that can support that child. So we have a system within this improvement process. So why do we do school improvement? Research says we want to enhance student achievement. We want to close the achievement gap. We want positive school climate and culture. We want to make sure that we're intentional in our initiatives, and that's why we have a school improvement plan. Teacher satisfaction. When you can set goals and you know what a target is, it's really about a focus of being intentional. When teachers know that and they're able to drive that within their classrooms, it creates a better satisfaction. Parent community engagement. We have these things are called individual reading and improvement plans for our students at the elementary level. It provides that communication back and forth between parents and students, our conference reports, our report cards, anything that we send out. We want to make sure parents are engaged and know what's going on in the classroom.
Excuse me. Marvin, just so you know, in this room, you're welcome to say, Keith, that ain't happening. You're bulletproof.
We're collaborating.
You're bulletproof. Okay, all true. Okay.
So I appreciate your comments, but it's happening.
My daughter has an IREP. She uses that Lexia. I would say that, yes, I've seen the whole thing too on it. Don't worry.
The My Kid process, it's essential for promoting continuous growth and progress, fostering a learning environment, ensuring that every student gets what they need. We really want to kind of narrow the focus down to individual students through this process. So the question is, go ahead.
Do you go through how those are measured?
Yes.
Okay.
I'll keep going on and I'll hopefully answer that question as we go through. So what are the common components of this process? We really want data-driven decision-making. And to your point, Sean, that's one of the things that we do. Progress monitored through data. We have benchmark data assessment that we use. We have individual goals that teachers set for students, but we also have school-wide goals as well. Inclusive and equity-focused approach. I'm not sure why this isn't showing up. It's showing up on mine.
It's my kid being clunky.
I think the smart's shared. There's been a problem with this.
Okay, we're Chris Family.
We gave him an eye off.
Continuous monitoring, curriculum alignment to standards and best practice. That's one of the things that I'll show you in an example. Scheduled meetings, that we have regular meetings to take a look at this work. Then we have resource allocation and support, and I'm going to show you through an example in a second. And then making the process visible to staff and having a narrow, specific focus. We want our staff to know what's taking place, how we're doing this work, so that they're engaged and they're implementing it with fidelity. So this graphic kind of shows you what continuous improvement is. It's kind of a summary. So you start with assessing your needs. You identify your data that you want to take a look at, and you use that data to identify where your needs are, and you develop a data story, and then you create a root cause analysis. What is the reason or the purpose for us having the data stating the way it's stated? So if we want to improve our data, what is the cause for us not having our desired state of where we want our data to be? And then we create a challenge statement. Once we do that, then we define our goals, we select a strategy, we identify those strategies, and then we would just monitor and implement. So this is an example of that. Last year, about a year and a half ago, ELA committee at the elementary level came to me and said, listen, we feel that there may be a lack of resources in the area of phonics and word study in our school district. We need to take a look at how we can supplement that programming in our district. So we took a look at our data. We looked at NWEA data, and we looked at NSEP data. And we took a look and narrowed that focus down, and we found through our data story that we built that promoting phonological awareness development is an area that we needed support in. Explicit explanation of how to play with words and sounds explicit instruction and letter sound relationships. So dip graphs, blends, or digraphs, blends, diphthongs, common spelling patterns. We found that all of those areas needed some level of support with certain groups of students. Morphology and also attending to word relations, semantics maps, and concept mapping. Those were all things through the literacy essentials that we felt needed support. And the reason we looked at that, we kept looking at our overall data, and we saw our benchmark data was great, actually. We actually, through the pandemic, did not have any learning loss in our 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade classrooms. We actually did better than anticipated. The national average took a big dip. However, our achievement gap during that time grew. So our highest level students achieved really, really well. But our students that were struggling, we found our Black students, our economically disadvantaged students, and our special ed students, the gap kind of grew. So we figured, what can we do? What is the reason? And we found when we dig deep into the data, these bulleted items were the reason. So then we said, why? What is the root cause analysis to this? So when we met, we kind of took a look at the data, then we looked at the why. We had many supplemental resources being used in the district to address these skills. So teachers were going to teacher pay teacher, they were maybe using a program that they've used from years ago. We had probably 20 or 30 different programs that teachers were diving into that weren't consistent across the school district to address phonics, unless you were going to reading support. Those kids that were in reading support were getting exactly what they needed, a specific program through our reading teachers, through FAST, and also Orton Gillingham. But our tier 1 approach, our classroom teachers, were not having a consistent approach to teaching phonics and spelling and word study. So our challenge statement as a group was, how can we supplement and have vetted district programming around phonics and word study? So what we did is we defined our goal. We want to close the achievement gap for subgroups based on this data story that we have created. We selected the strategy. The strategy, through 7 or 8 meetings, it's already was approved by the board and went to the curriculum board committee and all of those types of things. We adopted really great reading as our program. We are implementing it this year. All the teachers are getting trained in that program, and we're starting to dive into the resources that have been made available to them. And then at 4th and 5th grade level, we use Wordsmith. So we've identified those are the only 2 programs that we're using to identify the needs in phonics awareness and word study.
So are the teachers still using all the supplemental programs? Are those all cleaned
They're
up?
all cleaned up. So then our funding strategy, at this time we determined, because we already knew through our ELA committee 3 years ago that we were going to probably move to this kind of direction. So we put, when we were budgeting, we put a line item for phonics instruction in our budget. Our communication strategy, it's been through committee work. We've had 7 or 8 committee meetings around this. PLC presentation, board curriculum committee presentation, and then really the training for the staff. They have 4 specific training dates that are between now and December during their PLC time in the morning. And they've also had a training on August 30th, I believe it was, of a half-day training with the program and then a half-day training specific to phonics instruction. And then we implement, monitor, and adjust. So we're going to continue meeting as a committee, looking at the program, making sure that teachers are getting what they need. We do have a coach on special assignment who is paid for through a grant from Wayne Research. Her name is Julie Burke. You may have heard of her. She goes into classrooms and helps support the implementation of this program. And then once we do all this work, we enter it all into the MyKit platform. So it's all been pushed into the MyKit platform in a very high level kind of support. And then we're going to be looking at our NWEA data, and we'll be looking at our MSTEP data in 2023 and 2024 to see where this is going. So we'll go back, if we were to go back a slide and take a look at our data story.
You said these keyboard arrows?
Yeah. If we take a look at these bulleted areas, we're going to dive back into this at the end of the school year after we get our NWEA data to see if any of this is improved for our subgroups that we noticed that had a gap in.
So what goal did you set up for this? What's your goal?
The goal? I'd have to get you the exact language of the goal because this was just a high-level overview, but I think it's access in literacy for all students in the area of phonics and word study.
Is there some
And then
measurable?
the measurable goal is to close the achievement gap. So we didn't, I don't specifically think we have a number to it, but it was closing the achievement gap.
But that gap is knowable, and the delta between the end of this year and then the last year
Correct.
will be knowable, and you can judge it based on, was that good enough for 1 year?
So our overall goal every year is we take a look at our fall NWEA data and our spring NWEA data, and the goal is 1 year's growth in 1 year's time for all students and all kids. Now we want more than that, but we want to be realistic because goals need to be realistic. We want to make sure our kids are making that 1 year's growth in 1 year's time. So on average, there's a formula that we use that gives 100 as that 1 year's growth in 1 year's time. Each year, we're usually between each grade level 95 to 106. That was in the benchmark report that I did to the board last October. So I mean, we usually meet that goal that we set into the MyKip platform. 95, yes, we would like to be closer to 100, but there's always some reason why. There's a variety of different variables, and each year is a little bit different from every year. But I do know that is always our focus, getting to 100 is our focus.
Is that something we should be putting on the board agenda for you to present in October?
I've presented every year, usually in October or November, a benchmark assessment. So this year it's not required by the state. We haven't identified the date that we would put that on the board agenda.
Thank you.
So do you compare different elementaries, like if the need is greater at a certain elementary, when you're looking at the data and you're funding the
We do. We take a look.
more sources?
More sources would go towards that one space to the other. Whenever we purchase anything for our tier 2 and tier 3 students, we want to make sure they get what they need. So if one school has more tier 2 and tier 3 students, and those are students that are working below grade level. Tier 1 students, that's for everybody. Tier 2 and tier 3 students, those are usually the students that are working below grade level. We provide more supports for those students, through reading support, our literacy coaches. Reading is the foundation of everything that we do, every kind of area. So we really want to hone in on literacy support for those students. Coaching, if we have coaching needs, we send them to those spaces as well. So then, when Mike and I talked, he was like, well, what are you doing with school improvement? I gave him this please note, this is high level overview. I mean, I could go for hours and talk about this and break down each one of these components and show you the work that we did with that.
Hours.
But we talked about that before the meeting.
We did. But the thought was, some of the future considerations, when knowing just this high level overview, how can we make this process more visible and provide a tiered level of information to our stakeholders? And what that means is there are some teachers need to know certain things. Families need to know certain things, board needs to know certain things. How much information is needed for each level of the group? So, I've been hired to do this work and to support the teachers through this work, to support our administrators through this work. How much more information does the community need more than higher over level? Is it a once a year kind of presentation that provides like where we were in the fall, where we are in the spring, and what are our goals that we're going to achieve, moving forward, or how we're using grant money to support that? So what are the things that we want to do in a tiered level approach? Can we leverage our PA25 report to make it easy to read information about school improvement process? Right now, our PA25 reports are filled with stuff. There's a lot of information in there, but it might be difficult for someone to really understand the information in there. Can we make it a little bit more readable for community members to be able to see it, just view it, and then create something that is more visibly pleasing, graphs or bar graphs or pie charts or something that's easier to read for families, so they don't have to try to figure it out on their own. And then the last thing, how do we create policy that is flexible to change based on the requirements that occur at the state and federal level? MyKip is what we're doing now. We may be told at Michigan Department of Education that this is shifting to something new in a year or two. We used to have a SIS. Before that, we had school improvement. Before that, we had a checklist that we had to turn in that was on a paper PDF document that we had to mail in. things were always changing at the state level. So how do we make a policy that is flexible with the changes that we're still required to do at the state level?
Why was the policy, Mike, maybe you know this if you've been spending so much time on this, why was the policy redacted or eliminated?
Well, the only thing I heard, and apart from you and I talked to John Dean about it, was I didn't hear anything specific to this. It was more the simpler is better, and we'll pay Clark Hill instead of the outfit in Ohio or whoever. was driving
Neil.
that old- Yeah, those folks were driving it. I never heard anything about this in particular.
Okay, David, do you have any?
Yeah, that was basically the philosophy behind it. I don't remember any discussion about intentionally changing any kind of performance-based policy or reporting-based policy. I don't know how much of that was just, hey, this is a thing we are doing, right? And the board kind of gives the broad guidance to it, and the administrative guidelines or through administrative practices, you guys determine exactly how to set the goals and report on it. And then if we want something more different, we ask for it on an ad hoc basis versus like enshrining it into policy. So I don't know. I mean, is the policy is written giving you guys sufficient guidance to kind of know what the board wants and how to respond to that, or is there something that is there ambiguity there that it'd be good to clear up, or is there?
I think we're all looking at giving more information. When I look at the policies that Mike has said, I appreciate you said on Mike, the ones that are now retired. It's like, for instance, policy 1110 is assessing of district goals. District goals are strategies and actions being used to accomplish things about the district will be reviewed. So when we talk about that, that's a generic, very generic term that was in that policy that instructed administration. So when we think about some of the things that are in here, we talk about, said root cause, we said going back and looking at it, making adjustments and accommodations for the materials. Some of those things are already naturally happening and probably to a greater level of detail than what actually was in some of the policies. Although they're not there anymore, we're still doing some of the work, even though the policy isn't there. So I don't know.
Are they in the guidelines?
Say it again.
Is that in the guidelines? David mentioned administrative guidelines.
I can go back and check. I don't think we have that.
I don't think so.
I don't think we have that in the AG anymore because the policy came out, the AG came out. But it's simply telling us what my kid is making us do. So I don't know if we need the redundancy of it. But I guess we're up to the leaders of the board to say what, and I think he said it well, what is every level of individual in that community needs or wants a certain level of commitment from us around what does it look like as far as our students' achievement. Another thing I do want to point out, like, yes, we are looking at achievement gaps. We're looking at all achievement gaps. We're talking about like male to female ratio, we're talking about poverty, we're talking about socioeconomic status. All of those gaps we're looking at. But if you talk about a year's growth, and the year's growth will look different for every child. Because it depends on when they come in, and that's why early childhood education is so important for us. And we're putting so many resources, especially at the kindergarten and pre-K level, to make sure some of those gaps are not there. Prime example, we talk about a year's growth. Let's say you're in third grade. My son's score in third grade may have been 195. So if his score is at 195 and another third grader comes in and they're at 125, when we get that data and we give it to you, there's still going to be a discrepancy. Because the year's growth for somebody that's at 125 may be at 140. But my son is already at 195, his growth may be 210. So when we talk about closing that achievement gap, we're not looking to close the gap based upon bringing students down. We're looking to close that gap based upon accelerating learning for our learners. So I want to make sure that we're being intentional about this is not going to be an easy thing about closing achievement gaps. And I don't think any district in the state of Michigan has like, oh, we've closed every gap that exists. That's not it. The goal is to definitely get to teach to the students in which we have in front of us. So I just want to be clear and transparent about that. No matter what process we put in place, unfortunately, some of those gaps will exist because every student needs their own individualized learning plan. You can ask a couple of questions, that way you kind of can talk a couple of things. Here's some questions I think the committee might find value in. When you present this information, this is not just elementary, this is K-12, correct? Correct. When we talk
Just
about,
the example was an elementary example.
correct. I think that's good to be able to point out. Can you also tell us a little bit about what literacy footprints are? Because you mentioned that a couple of times.
You mean the essential?
I'm sorry, literacy essentials.
Literacy essentials. So literacy essentials are the 10 overarching Michigan Department of Education recommendations of what standard care in literacy should look like. So all of our teachers have been trained in the literacy essentials. We use those to kind of guide our approach whenever we're looking at a program. So before we look at a program and say, this program's great, they have great recommendations, we sit down and look at the essentials first, because that is kind of our guideline of how we want to teach ELA to our students. So we look at those essentials, and Essential 10 is about parent involvement and engagement. Essential 7 is about word study and making sure that we have vocabulary acquisition. 3 and 4 are specific to phonics. So we looked at those, we dove deep into it, and then we took a look at those essentials and compared them against the programs we were looking for to use as our focus of supporting our students. So we use those essentials as kind of a guideline of how do we approach things. So when teachers are sitting there and saying, what is the best approach to teaching literacy in my classroom? Those essentials is that approach.
Can you explain to me what a data story is and how building principals use that data story to not only compel their teachers, but to use it as a benchmark for what their building goals are?
It's their baseline. So they take a look at their data story as a baseline to identify where their areas of needs are. So each group of principals work with their staff, and sometimes what they'll do is they'll create that data story, and maybe they'll notice that they do have the 30th percentile and below students, they got 8 or 9 kids in that area. How do we make sure that we are targeting interventions around those kids? They might set goals around those kids. They might see that there's 8 or 9 kids in this data story that were in the 90th percentile, but they're now in the 88th percentile. What do we do with those kids to make sure we keep their achievement high? So that's where they set those individual goals for students, and then through their conference reports, they'll sit down with parents and have conversations about, hey, your child's doing great. They're in 3rd grade, they're working at a middle 3rd grade, 4th grade level in this area. But how do we extend that? This is the goal that we can do so. So I mean, those are the types of things that they do when they look at that data, and they're creating data stories within their classrooms to develop their SMART goals. With the students.
How do you test adherence to that data story?
Say that again?
How do you test adherence by the building to those data stories?
How do we test it?
Yeah, I mean, you come up with a plan, how do you measure it, test it?
We measure it based off, I mean, as a district, we look at the global assessment data. So our NWA scores in the beginning of the school year to the end of the school year, our fall benchmark assessment to spring to see if we've made that growth.
That's by building.
We look at it district-wide and per building. So I have cohort data that goes back, and you can see the different groups of students from year to year and all the demographics as well. And I have it color-coded so you can even see, how we did in 2019 and how those same kids are doing in 2020. But that's district level. Buildings kind of narrow it. They narrow it to their building, then they narrow it to the classroom, and then teachers narrow it to their students. So it's like every kind of level, it gets narrowed down. And then through our planning process that teachers do in the beginning of the year to the end of the year, they use their conferences to have conversations with parents about those goals.
I mean, do you measure effectiveness of principals
We measure
in this process?
the 40% of the evaluation process is based off of data.
It's like teachers.
Just like
Teachers is the same way, 40%.
40% is.
Correct. Yeah, and so like prime example, like principals do have to talk about their MyKip goals and their evaluation. And also they do have to bring us data to talk about what exactly is happening in their field. Like I'll give you a prime example. Let's think about Sarah Gertie for a second. At Pierce. And how she has used ESSER funding in her building to be able to try to cut down some of the literacy gaps she was seeing within some of her students. So she took an intervention approach where she was giving some students more time to be able to read during the day and supplying maybe with like an extra teacher or a co-teacher model. And then she saw some growth out of the students where they didn't need that extra support anymore when it came to the second semester. So she was able to say, okay, we have these 15 students here who are reading at this level. I believe they were 5th grade students that were coming from the elementary schools. And then she said, okay, my goal is to get these 15 students up to here. And she was able to do that based on how she used her ESSER funding. So we will have conversations with principals around that.
And do you take best practices and say, what happened over here in this huge achievement, and can we flow this around to the other buildings?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. I mean, every building's a little different as far as what they can and what they have. Some buildings who are Title I have extra support, but then some of those areas they're able to utilize that. And then some of the things, like for instance, how Syrup able to use their ESSER funding, Brownell's not able to do that because they already used the funding other way. So like they can't do that this year. They won't be able to do it unfortunately next year because that's the money that's going away. So it depends on what the best practice is. But I think that's why we've been kind of talking about those literacy essentials, because those are the best practices that MD has given us that we're trying to make sure permeate throughout our buildings.
I'd also want to add, I always want to be careful about how prescriptive we are in certain areas, because every kid needs something different. Every situation needs something different. There's so many variables in education, so I want to give teachers the autonomy to be able to really kind of dive into the work and give them the resources they need to help support kids. And I want to, once we start getting very prescriptive about things, it's hard for teachers to kind of shift and support kids that they might need to support differently. So that's why we try to provide as many, resources as we can to support all kids.
I have a bit of a follow-up along those lines. You had a slide showing all of the areas that you had identified with all of the reading jargon.
Sure.
For lack of a better phrase.
Education jargon.
Did you, well, I mean, it was specific to the literacy, right? The diphthong.
The diphthong.
All of that, right? So along the lines of not being overly prescriptive, if those are key issues within the district that require a supplement, does that indicate that our curriculum needs to be adjusted, or is supplement the way that you address the individual student and everything in the curriculum is fine? Is that, because when I see that, I'm like, all right, well, why do we still need supplements, right? Why is the curriculum itself not enough? And to your point, we don't want to be, overly prescriptive to exclude students, but it seems if we've identified all these areas where we're kind of lacking, how do we make that adjustment in the curriculum so we don't have to rely on supplements? It seems like we're relying on a lot of supplements, but maybe that's just from the presentation.
Yeah, I would say that this particular, I know we're calling it a supplement, but I would maybe call it an addition. Maybe that was an incorrect phrasing that we're using, but it's a new addition to make what we currently do even better. So I believe that this program is exactly what we need to continue the path that we want to go with our students. And we'll know at the end of this year, at the end of next year, we purchased this and identified it for 3 years, because it really takes 3 years to build a program into into the school district to see if it's working or not. So in 3 years, we'll know, but we'll know pretty quickly. We'll know you're not going to get one.
And so if
we're being intentional about this process.
If it's clearly successful and it's an addition, does it migrate into the main curriculum? When I think about supplements, I think about like the extra study guide you had to buy off of Amazon because the book itself wasn't enough, right? So you had to go do your own thing.
No, there's accountability factors to this program. There's certain things that teachers need to kind of dive into to make sure that it's being implemented, and there's checkpoints along the way. And they have to be so far along in the program before their next training so that the training makes sense to them, and building principals are managed to do that.
So is there a review of the overall curriculum at the end of this process to identify what parts of the core curriculum need to be changed?
We purposely purchased this to be for 3 years because the ELA review is at that time frame. So what we're going to do is we'll take a look at all of our ELA programming K-12 in 3 years is when it's up. And that's when we'll identify if this program is working, if we have to adjust, do something different. And then that's what we do. Makes sense.
Sorry, go ahead.
So like in the elementary, you're concentrating on math and English, reading. Yeah, what about history or
Why
science?
did you say that?
It's just the basics, right?
So I don't know how much time you have, but I know I'm monopolizing some of your time here.
Oh, we have
I know I said 10
This is very important.
Until 6:30.
So we're in a social studies review right now, K-12 social studies review. Last year what we did is we dove into an analysis of our current programming and resources. And we wanted to compare that against our curriculum. We wanted to take a look at teacher usability of the programs that we have. We wanted to take a look at student responsiveness. We wanted to take a look at, is it aligned to our best practice and is it aligned to standards? So we take a look at those 4 areas. And what we did and we found is that we needed more training in regards to the C3 framework, which is the curriculum framework for social studies. So we took a look at that framework. We got training from the MISD and Wayne Lizza social studies consultants. So all of our social studies at the secondary level got training. Our committee at the elementary level got training. They're actually now all teachers are going to get training on October 31st. Because you have to have an understanding of what best practice is and what research and what the standards are before you can start looking at a resource. So then what we're going to do is we're going to take that knowledge and we learn more about inquiry-based instruction and questioning strategies, because that is a big component of social studies instruction. And then we're going to dive that into the work that we're going to do with the community work this year. And then hopefully by the end of this year, what we'll have is we'll have all of our current resources revamped into starting the activities through an inquiry lens and making sure our teachers have an understanding of the right questions to ask along the way within those resources that we currently have. And then at the middle school and high school level, we actually already did some work at the high school level where we purchased new AP resources last year for our college, that were specifically from College Board. So we were able to do that as well. So yes, literacy and numeracy are important, but we are focused on the other content areas as well.
What's your budget coming 23-24?
The 23-24 budget, what we budgeted for was about $800,000, which is a little low compared to our overall budget. It's usually, school districts use about 2 to 3% of their operating budget to spend on curriculum resources. We use about 1%.
2 to 3%, is that a national or state standard?
It's just what people have told me when I have conversations with them and I network with
So
them.
that's what they want you to think.
It's not in writing somewhere, that I found online. It's just when I talk to some of my networking friends and other places.
Is technology in there, or is that's
So-
just content?
Digital content is part of our curriculum resources.
So
So
we used to call it the book budget. And the book budget was what, Chris? You recall?
That range all over the place, depending on there's
Depending on the year.
review it, you get
Right.
when I first started, it was about 300,000.
I was gonna say it's 300,000-400,000.
Yeah, the change and the difference now is when you purchase a curriculum, you usually purchase it for 3 to 6 years. And then once it's over, you can't just say, we're going to continue with this curriculum, this book, we're just going to keep this book because it's a subscription now. Even if you have the book, you can't have access to any of the online programming. So really, the publishers, they've got us every 6 years. So that's why that's one of the reasons why our budget has gone up substantially in the last few years.
But is that enough? 800,000, is that enough? to do
Next year, we're budgeting for about 1.2 million, and the year after that, about 900,000. I have it already planned out for the next 3 years.
You
what
do,
we're
so you know what you're digging into us already. That's good to know, I mean, that's important. Thank you.
So, do you have a question?
I did have a question on and it may not, if it doesn't fit into this conversation, ignore it, but when students come into the district, you really mentioned devoting resources to kindergarten, first grade, pre-K, whatever. When students come into the district later on, how are they addressed and, assessed relative to where they should be? Because obviously somebody that's gone through the entire program, K through 12, you can plan, right, and they're on the Grosse Pointe path. But somebody else that comes in, how are they merged in and, kind of brought up to speed? And if that doesn't fit in, we can talk about it.
It doesn't, but it's a great question, and I'd be happy to answer it. So at the elementary level, immediately when a student comes in, We take a look at their, past experiences where they were. Most school districts are using NWEA or some form of an assessment that is easily available for us to read and analyze. And then we determine, what level of supports does that student need when they come in. So we'll look at their previous test scores that are, parents usually send to us. It's in their CA60, their file that comes with this from the school district. But we also, what we'll do is we'll take one of our literacy coaches and have them do an assessment, usually a running records or a reading assessment, functional assessment. You probably have heard of F&P if you have kids at the elementary level. We'll do an assessment to identify kind of where they're at, what level they're at. We might do a word identification or vocabulary acquisition activity to see how many words they know. And then as they get older, we'll take a look at really their NWA scores of where they're at. And there's usually learning bands, and those learning bands will make sure teachers are aware of where that learning band is so that they know exactly where to filter the student into a learning group when they get into the classroom. At the middle school and high school level, they do something similar. The counselors will be usually the ones that access the information from that CA60, and then they'll reach out to the individual teachers regarding what the correct placement for the students. If they need a foundations class or if they need a more advanced placement course, they will make sure that students are in those classes.
So they take that test before they actually start a class?
They usually, so the state of Michigan, if they're coming from the state of Michigan, all states have some level of requirement of assessments. The state of Michigan, you have to have one of 4 assessments. It's either NWA, iReady, STAR, or the one that's just blanking me right now. But there's 4 different assessments that you have to choose from. Most school districts in Michigan are using NWEA. Most of the CA60, so we already have those results when a kid comes to us because school districts have already been.
So that's all centralized where you can grab that data on that student. Got it.
Thank you, but one, that's a great question. Two, I feel like we can do better in that area. I think when we think about students, and I think you said it, but you didn't say it, like the Grosse Pointe way.
Yeah.
Like, I know that's not what you said.
No, it was pretty close. I can't remember, but I did. Yeah.
But so when we talk about students that come in, we talk about a regular curriculum material that's built for, let's say, a 7th grade class. You're not building a material that reaches the book for a child who has various needs. Right. So when we talk about supporting, supplement, resources, we have to give our teachers opportunities to be able to meet the needs of the students that are in front of them. So yes, that curriculum is there for it, but every child doesn't match up with that book. Yeah. We have some students who have AP needs and need another support system on top of the book that they already had to be able to continue to excel. And we have some students who may come to us at a different level where we have to make sure that they are still striving to kind of come into what we feel like is the Grosse Pointe way. But we need to talk about what does that look like, what's the trajectory on that, and dedicate more resources to that. That's a great opportunity for us that we definitely can embrace.
So, this is a software program, from what I understand, that's being used?
It is.
If any, you may already answer this question, but how much insight do parents have along this whole path?
So they were involved in certain pilot teachers. There were kids that were in the program and information was provided to the parents so that they knew about the program. It is a digital content resource that they use, but a lot of times it's resources that are up on the smartboard and taught to the whole class, so the teacher is engaging in the teaching of that skill or that particular lesson. And then the kids go off and they do their activity. And some of them are electronic and some are black-line masters that they'll pull out. But parents, there were 2 parents on the committee, two parents on the committee that had information the whole way, so they went to all 7 meetings. So they were able to kind of engage in the process. And then all of the parents received information about the pilot classrooms. And then after that, what we do is, now that we have it embedded into our curriculum, there's information that goes to parents on activities that the teachers will send and newsletters and stuff like that. Yeah.
So what goes out to the parent, Keith? Is there a report, a structured report?
So eventually, once the students are, at a certain point of the program, we can pull out data that showcases how students doing. So if they're doing extremely well, we can kind of show kind of where they're at in the program. If they have needs for interventions, it'll pull out specific standards that a child needs to work on. So if they're working on digraphs, which are 2 letters that make one sound, like SH. If they're struggling with that specific skill, a teacher can pull a black line master to support the student in the classroom, but also support the parent at home to provide them a level of detail. So conference time is usually where they'll do those type of reports. So a diphthong, which is a little bit more advanced, that's taking 2 vowels and putting them together like oil, O-I. If you're having a hard time understanding how to make those sounds, then that particular skill would be put forth for a parent to work on those skills at home. So that's kind of how the differentiation is. So, those double consonant sounds or the double vowel sounds, they're a higher skill than the SH sounds. So, that's kind of how teachers differentiate in their classroom and provide a different approach when they're supporting parents at home.
What I really appreciate about, from a policy perspective, from the presentation and the discussions and the questions here, is that there's a lot to think about and a lot that you guys have already done, right? And when you're talking about how to identify areas of concern and how to address it, I think you've given some really good examples of why you want, at the building level and at the classroom level, a lot of flexibility to identify what that need is, right? And then meet that need, and then still measure it and show success. So I think when we talk about what policy looks like around this and kind of what, should or should not be changed in the policy piece, clearly the work is getting done, right? So then just the question become the first point on your slide here, how do we better communicate what's going on, how we're achieving results, and how we're measuring results versus changing the policy, right? How do we just provide better information for people? Because we know that, both at this table and people in the community are concerned about achievement, making sure that we're having high educational standards. So it might be less of a policy issue and more of a communications piece. Because I would imagine that the deeper you get into prescribing policy on it, the more potential there is for kind of dictating particular pathways or approaches in the classroom that may or may not work for every student, may or may not work for every teacher. So I thought you guys did a really great job of highlighting in real ways how this work is being done effectively. And I think that highlighting the communications piece might be a better way to approach that as opposed to a significant policy shift.
Well, it seems to me, David, you've got a valid point there that possibly the policy needs to be how we're communicating this to the community and some kind of structure for doing that. I know you spent the time on this.
With this, Keith and Roy and Chris, thank you very much. It's great. I love this level of detail and coming back to the policies. And we had talked about this before. Is it really just disclosure as opposed to substance? And I, for one, think there should be a new policy to address this. I think educational excellence is important and worth the effort. I think it's important for the board to declare its support and its expectation for excellence and school improvement planning process to get there. And I also think it's important for the board to support or express its support for the administration. And none of this is wordsmith, but the state mandates are coming from the legislature because we're politicians responding to political processes. And yes, we have to do that, but we also have experts. And so we want them to obviously got to do the state mandates, but also do what they know is best for our students in our district. And I think the board could express its support for that. Negative, I'm being on positive reasons, but negative reasons, as Keith pointed out, it used to be a checkbox. It could go back, and we don't want that. The state used to require annual assessments. They don't anymore. So those are substantive things that I would think the board would want to address. And you and I talked about this a lot. Make sure it's flexible, but policy should be high level, right? So if you're talking about having school improvement process, if you're talking about assessments and presentations to the board, that's not very prescriptive. That's fairly high level. So I, for one, would think it'd be good for this committee to maybe play with some language and see what a policy looks like. It's not too prescriptive, it is flexible, and addresses what the board wants in this area.
It's
That's my
very
take.
simple, it's coming
Have
out
you
just
drafted it yet?
describing what we're doing.
I have broad concepts, I haven't put it into a policy yet,
Okay,
but I can, and we can talk about it again.
you've got a half hour.
I figure this is long-term stuff, so, you know,
No, I'm only kidding.
putting it in the policy and circulating it and everybody shooting at it, that's fine.
Well, that might be something even that we're already doing some of this. Maybe administration could provide some language that describes what's going on already.
Right.
And we can provide, like, I think it's always good
It's
for
a
the
collaborative
board
process.
to reaffirm the importance of these things. So we can say, hey, we reaffirm the importance of, these are the current procedures we're following, you know.
And another example, just something prescriptive, somewhere in the PR, it talks about fancy analysis and reporting. I don't know that those features are built into the thing yet. So the board may want analysis and reporting, but you can't necessarily tie it to my kid, because I don't know that it's all in there yet. They're talking about changing a lot of this, improving it,
They're talking about improvement.
beefing it up over time. So,
Like you said, every fall we get a pretty in-depth presentation view on how we hit benchmarks or other reporting and things like that. So again, it might just come down to stating in one place, hey, this is the sum.
And we actually have a plan to do a presentation, I believe this November, we were talking about the first meeting in November.
Okay, let's go to our gold mine over here.
drum roll.
No
I
pressure.
appreciate it. I'm excited to hear the commitment to some systems, because it's nice to have freedom, but a lot of times it can be overwhelming. And from year to year, from meeting to meeting, you talk with colleagues, you realize that that's a much better way to help this idea click, or that's a gap in what I thought I was doing well. And so back to how I started at the high school level, a lot of it is so open-ended. I really appreciate the freedom. You can do a lot. I just found the other day, there's a great website called diffit.me, and you can enter passages, readings, and you can choose the grade level equivalent of questions for it to design.
What is it called?
Diffit, DIFFIT.me. It's free right now. The developers have said they promise they'll keep a free version. But
6 seconds.
we do have, there's just so much, when you go into our high school, and all of our schools, you're not gonna find a mimeograph anymore, but you're not gonna find the equivalent of a mimeograph going off with lots and lots of prefab items. A lot of our items are custom designed and created by the teachers and through our PLCs. And it's nice, but it's also, it's a lot of pressure on us to make sure that our questions are well crafted, well designed, that we're aligning with the state standards. And so having some materials ready to go, well designed, is nice. At the high school level, we haven't, I think our last book investment was Just Mercy, great legal memoir, but we haven't updated kind of textbooks in a long time with a lot of our courses. So within our field, yeah. So
We just spent a lot of money on.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Science. The board spent all the
You're
money.
up soon.
Science. So we went with science.
There you go, that's why you're here.
Yeah.
But no, I appreciate it. Appreciate the investment in research.
Thanks, Ken.
So this program started, or was mandated by the state last year, right?
MICA, the school improvement process. It was 2021-22 is when they removed the previous process, and then they moved into a paper pencil process that we could have created, or go into the platform that was shutting down and not working very well. So we still did our paper pencil, kind of process, and we submitted it to the state that way. last year is when we started entering everything into MindKit because the platform is working better now.
The platform, is that based on the number of students in the system or the number of teachers being trained or?
No, the platform is specific to school improvement. What is our data? What is our root cause analysis? How are we going to develop improvement? And then what are the strategies that we're using to improve upon our goal? So right now, literacy is an area of focus, one of our goals, and we use the really great reading, our literacy coaching at the elementary level. Lexia is one of our goals, our MindKit goals, and that's what buildings are using to kind of focus on that. So I would imagine at some of your staff meetings, kind of, you probably heard about MindKit. You probably heard about, kind of some of the strategies that we have in place. Restorative practice is one, and all of our teachers are getting trained in that. Lexia is our tier 2 and tier 3 focus at the high school level. At the elementary, it's a tier 1, 2, and 3 approach, the Lexia program. And then really great reading was added. We have Freckle that we're using as a program. So, all of those strategies that we're using and some of the instructional strategies that are kind of built into the platform as strategies that we use.
Do we print out or pass out to the parents the end of the results?
We do.
Okay, yeah, great.
It's provided in a portal to parents at conference time usually.
Okay.
Mike, what policies do you see this impacting if we do some kind of comprehensive change?
Well, I don't see anything in the current, there's student assessment.
Yep.
Which I took to be student assessment, not sort of school improvement. So I would think it's a new one. And it's, I for one, would go back to the old one. Because I think it's gotta be more current, perhaps less prescriptive, picking up key points. So I think of it as just a new policy.
Though, could this impact reporting student progress, third grade reading requirements? Would any of that, this could be comprehensive where it impacts a few areas.
Can I put sure on that? I would be careful of saying third grade reading requirements because those requirements might change. So I would
They have
probably say
changed,
they have changed.
Yeah.
So the reporting system has changed. So there's no longer a process where we have to retain students any longer in third grade if they don't, pass the M step, which that was a requirement in the past. All the reporting that we do, even before the law, we were already doing all of those things. We already had reporting, students that were in a tier 2 or tier 3 need. We were getting them support through a reading specialist. So we were doing all the things, and then the state came out with third grade reading legislation, and it was nice because we were already doing everything. The only thing we weren't doing is we didn't have a specific hieroglyph developed at conference time. We weren't retaining students. So we were able to put those things in place as identified. I probably would create something that is specific to school improvement, that we are going to have a school improvement plan and be consistent with legislation requirements. And then also maybe something that states that will provide a yearly update to the Board of Education in regards to benchmark reporting. I think those two things are things that would be appropriate for us to do and also provide you the level of detail that you want to see within the school district, specific to how our fall reports are versus our spring reports.
And if we put something down, a draft to shoot at, then see how it affects anything else in the policies, right? How it touches anything else. But then that's sort of the target to shoot at.
I think what would be great is if you worked with the administration on this first and then brought it back.
Excellent.
And then it's something that we could work on as a committee and, as you say, shoot it down. Does that work for you guys? Yeah, I think that'd be perfect. Thank you. This has been great stuff.
So this was just a sliver of the work. I used that reading example, the really great reading. It's just a sliver of the example of how we do MindKit. It's much more broad than that. And we have a matrix of review process that we take through this process. So even prior to MindKit requirements, this is the process we have when we review curriculum and resources.
What are the other school systems doing? How does what we do compare to Bloomfield or Novi or Troy?
They're very similar. They have to go through the MICA process as well. When I've networked with other school districts and how we have our pretty comprehensive review process, ours is pretty detailed. In our Education Programs Leadership Council, a lot of districts might have a curriculum council, something similar to that, but the process to get to EPLC might be different. It might be just an administrator saying, we really want really great reading, let's just do it. But then you don't have buy-in, you don't have your staff that's part of the process, you didn't vet the program against standards, it's just one person making a determination, and that works for some districts. For our district, I think the process that we have is appropriate and provides a level of detail to our staff and community that is necessary.
Yeah, and I think in the November presentation, it'd be great if you could give a little more of that behind the scenes stuff too, in a few of the slides. This is the complexity behind it all.
I could easily do that. Our last presentation that we did with respect to all the curriculum work, we actually provided that to the curriculum committee. So I know that didn't get to the board because it went through the curriculum committee. Curriculum committee was comfortable with it. So when we went to the board, I just pretty much said thank you for approving, really great reading and the other programs that we, went through the process. But all four of the things, we're still going to do that. But the curriculum committee usually gets that level of detail.
Yeah.
But if you would like something like that for
I think showing the process is important for everybody. This would be, once a year, just like this is the process to get to the finished product that everybody sees.
You talk about reports, Keith. One of the things we used to get, I'm dating myself here, going back to the Susan Allen days, is we used to get a report, AP results, or AP testing results, and I don't remember ever seeing that recently.
I've done that. I've only been in this role for 3 weeks.
What the heck, man?
I'll take a look.
You can take a look. We used to have.
Ask your elementary questions. I'll give you all those.
I know you got it. You could take a look at that just for the heck of it, because I haven't seen that in quite a while.
I know we looked at AP class participation, AP test participation rates as part of John's evaluation, Gary's evaluation previously, so I know we're tracking it. I don't know.
We used to get a report by class, by school, and how many 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s, and 5s of that class.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, it was an eye opener, because you'd say, well, maybe that teacher should be teaching that other teacher how to teach that class.
It's I'm an AP teacher, and it's complicated. Kind of, what you said at the elementary level. I still remember we were at a forum, a couple colleagues and I, and one of the exam designers said, "Your scores are too high." And we said, we can lower it. No, but we've made a concerted effort to pull more students into the class. And for example, I teach AP English language and composition, and in some districts that's actually a required class, oddly enough. But you have to try it. But I'll say it's often, of all the AP courses, it's probably among the most popular. And our scores are lower than they were 15 years ago, but we have more sections, we have more students taking that course, and we have made a concerted, usually in the spring, we have like a pizza get together and a conversation with students who were recommended, but it looks like they had opted for maybe a traditional course, and we try to get them on board, show them some exam questions, talk about the course, and maybe those students get the 2 instead of the 3 or 5, which is passing. But we're happy that they elected it and have pushed themselves. And for some of those students, that might be, I can go to a 4-year school, I can do this, I can.
Right.
So, it's not a cop out. We're doing what we can.
What you're saying though, Kevin, is so important, because if you show that, hey, we've got X percentage of our students in AP Lang, for instance, that are taking that leap, then we understand why.
Yeah.
Yeah, we understand the context of it all, and that's huge to me, and I think to everybody. And
the AP Chem scores are very, very high, but it's it's a very specialized group of students who really want to take, good luck to them. Who want to take the AP chemistry courses.
I think that kind of goes to what Dave was talking about earlier around the communication, like how do we communicate some of those items. But I think the one thing we also have to acknowledge, Kevin, and you kind of said it, what I was saying is that curriculum is only the curriculum things. What we're talking about is also pass off to our teachers. To have those conversations, get people involved, having them to take the opportunity to take AP testing. Like our teachers are phenomenal. Yeah. And so like when we talk about our scores, it's not necessarily the curriculum or the book that we have in front of them, it's actually the person. Because they're able to take them to new heights and use supplemental material. So like the My Kit is great. When we call My Sippy next year, that's gonna be great. But at the same time, they're consistent as our teachers. We gotta make sure we can say something about that. So thank you, Kevin, for everything you do in the classroom.
We're gonna pick up you a lot, Kevin.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, it's great to have you here.
Yes. All right, new business. I don't believe we have any. Are there any policies or anything else anybody wants to take a look at the November meeting? And feel free to email me as well.
Got a whole bunch of work I'm sending you guys up as I walk out that door.
Make a statement.
Oh, no, just hey, I really appreciate the work of the committee, and it's been great to be on the policy committee for the last 3 years. And this is really the heart of when a board governs by policy, right? You have to be thoughtful about the policies that you're adopting and how you evaluate the effectiveness of that. So the work that this group does is very important, and I appreciate all the time and effort that you all put into it, and all the time and effort that you folks put into us to make sure that it's a useful exercise. So,
David, you do know we're sending stuff to you in Washington, right?
I'm gonna have a lot of free time. So
You have remote assignments.
I like it.
And we want to thank David for all the work that he's done. And this is the last policy meeting?
The last policy meeting, the 18th, October 18th.
You should have brought a cake or something.
Well, we do have something at the
Board meeting, we're gonna have a big cake.
Oh my goodness.
some cookies.
I'll ask surprise.
It'll be on the agenda, Dave. I don't wanna have any problems with somebody saying it's not on the agenda.
Okay, public comments. Do we have any public comments? We do not. Let's go around the room. Do we have any committee member comments, starting with Mr. Cox? President Ismail?
No.
Nice.
Just good luck.
Thank you, ma'am.
And I appreciated you giving everybody notice to put it out there for a replacement, so that's cool.
It's a really fun.
It's everywhere.
Nothing to them.
The administration?
I have been taught over the years that the two most important things the Board of Education does is one, hire a superintendent, which I hope we were very successful at that. And number two, policies. All the other stuff, it's all important, but those two are, that was hammered into us from day one.
Mike, I appreciate the extra effort you put into
Yes,
this.
absolutely. Thank you. And with that, we're adjourned.
Thank you.